Hey everyone, this is Jen and you're watching BPD Woman. On this channel, you will learn how to live more effectively with your borderline personality disorder. It's my goal to help you achieve your goals effectively. Using skills such as DBT and sharing my own personal experience after living with and trying to recover from the disorder for the last 20 years, my goal is to help you better understand your emotions, use skills to regulate your moods, and to decrease emotional lability and increase all of the positive things that you want to come your way. While I am not a life coach or a therapist, I can answer one question that most of those folks cannot, which is, what is it like to have borderline personality disorder? I was diagnosed over 20 years ago, and since that time, I've committed my blood, sweat, tears, money, commitment to recovering from the disorder. And that means multiple rounds of DBT. That means reading every book and workbook and then redoing them. That means being in one-on-one groups and group therapy and using my skills on a real-world basis. So if that sounds good to you, please hit subscribe and the bell below so you never miss a beat. I offer about 3 to 50, anywhere from 3 to 50, 3 to 5 videos each week, all designed with a problem and solution based approach to help you walk away with something not only that you could relate to as a problematic behavior or situation that you might find familiar in your life, but also offering you skills to help you solve those problems. So let's get into it. Today I want to talk about work triggers. Ooh. Sound effects. Okay, work triggers. That's the title of today's video. Work triggers, how to stay effective when you're dysregulated at work. So what do I mean by this? Well, I'm sure if you have a job or if you've ever had a job, especially one in the corporate world, you have experienced some sort of situation that I'm about to describe. Now, yes, I am self-employed now. I work for myself. It's just me. I answer to me. I'm the boss. I'm the chief. I'm the CEO. But for about 15 years prior to making that decision to become self-employed, I worked in the corporate world, and I worked for high-stress people in high-stress environments. I worked for CEOs, generals, people that you would recognize that have been on CNN. It was stressful, but I learned a lot about business acumen that helped me translate into my own business. However, I found it very, very difficult to manage my emotions in those settings. For one, it's a high-stress environment. Two, there's a lot of stimulus, right? There are lots of people. Generally, you are in a cubicle, so I'm not talking right now about working from home during the pandemic, but you're in a cubicle. There's lots of sounds, people eating, people listening to music, people that have their phone on speaker, all of the annoying habits that can become quite rude and inconsiderate to others in their workspace, right? Now, or maybe you don't. Maybe you have a very quiet workspace where everyone is pretty respectful and they take their calls outside, or they take them in a room, or they keep their voice down, or they at least pretend there's an invisible wall between you. But there are definitely situations that I ran into that were very problematic for me, and it did lead to write-ups, HR discussions. It led to firings, being laid off. Now, did I think that some of this had to do with my BPD? Yes, absolutely. My emotional dysregulation and my inability to hide what's on my face. I do not have a poker face, that I would say things. Now, also, I think there's something else at play, and I think that's sexism. So whatever your thoughts are on sexism, unless you're a woman that's lived in the workplace, you're not going to really be able to weigh in on this fully. But I saw people just like me who said and did things just like me, sometimes even worse. I mean, said downright illegal things. There was one guy who was a higher up that said to another employee, if you want to keep your job and be a mother, you're probably going to have to get a nanny. Illegal, right? So I never even came close to saying something like that. But he never got in trouble. So yes, I don't forget, there's still what I call the human factor, right? Not everything can be explained away by your BPD. You may get in trouble because somebody has a political agenda against you. You may get in trouble because somebody wants your job. You may get in trouble because you're a woman or a minority, or you're a gay man, or people don't like you, whatever. I digress. I want to talk now about some specific situations that I found problematic, and then I'm going to offer you tips on how to stay even Steven when you're in the moment so that you don't compromise your values. Remember, when emotion is high, logic is low. So emotion high, logic low. What does that mean? Well, that means that when you are flooded in that moment and angry or upset, or you see an email, or you're afraid, or someone said something to you that doesn't sit right, that's all you can focus on in that moment. That's what we call being highly dysregulated when you have borderline personality disorder. And in that moment, you forget things like, I have a dog at home that I'd like to provide food for. You forget that I have a car payment. You forget that, Christmas is coming up and you're trying to save more money. You forget that you want to put away for retirement and you have to keep starting jobs over so you never get much in your 401k. These are all situations that I have personally come up against, believe me. So let's talk about some situations that I have found particularly stressful. So the first is passive aggressive people. My favorite. Now, I think one thing that most people could say about me is I'm pretty direct. If I have a problem, I've always been of the mindset, talk to me, I'll talk to you. If you've got an issue, talk to me. I'm not a mind reader, even though I'll use fortune telling. I don't presume to know what other people are thinking. So if you have something to say, tell me about it. Now, most people don't do that. People tell you in life that they want the truth, but often the opposite is true. They just can't handle the truth. They don't have the thick skin for it, right? Or they don't have the skills to communicate with you effectively about it. So passive aggressive people looks like, somebody may be mad at you and so they ignore you in the workplace, right? Or the way they may undercut you in a meeting, right? Like, well, why would you make that decision, Jennifer? Or perhaps it's the way they communicate in their emails, perhaps they'll say something like, per my last email. Ugh. Or they might say, does that make sense? Now, my feelings on the phrase, does that make sense? And Google this for yourself. I talked about this briefly in another video. Is that people who say, does this make sense, are being passive aggressive. Why? First of all, the phrase, does this make sense, communicates two things. One, that the sender of the message is unclear about how well they're communicating the message. And two, it also presumes that the person receiving the message is a big time dummy. Well, I'm not a moron. So, okay, yes, would you explain it to me? I'm stupid. Okay, whatever. Perhaps they say things like, thanks, period. Can you not spend the extra 4 letters and say, thank you? These phrases may seem innocuous and, under a microscope, people could be like, well, that's not passive aggressive, but right? Like when you're in a regulated state and you're not feeling too out of your baseline, your emotional baseline, when people are doing things passive aggressively. People talk out of the side of their mouths, right? Like I had a coworker at a previous job who pretended to be on my side, but then she also fed, information to my boss. And later I found out when I actually finally walked out of that, she actually went into like my position or a little bit higher up. So passive aggressive people, that's one trigger. 2, stressful deadlines and environments, right? If you have a very go workplace, and of course that's obviously sometimes where the money is, and you may feel in that golden cage that you have to keep the money coming in, you can find yourself under some really stressful situations. Long work hours, right? Which leads to lack of sleep. It leads to not eating all of the time. It leads to you not being able to exercise all the time. All of that self-care stuff that is important for everyone, but I think even more particularly important to those of us with BPD so that we maintain some emotional baseline. You may have stressful bosses that come up to, where is it? You may have a boss that you schedule travel for that travels internationally 50, 60% of the year. That's who I used to serve, right? So stressful situations that can throw you off, that can overcome you. A third trigger, people that interrupt or push your boundaries. So I did another video about boundary pushers, And, in the workplace, it looks like people interrupting your personal space by continually coming over to your cubicle, right? Interrupting you with a story or personal event, keeping you a little bit too long in the kitchen area with a story, the person that sends a bunch of memes or jokes through email all the time, or, someone who sends you an email, but then they also call your desk and then they send you an IM and they walk up to your desk and they'll say something like, hey, did you get my call IM in my email? Like, so these are people that are boundary pushers and they're interrupting your personal space. And when you are in a cube, it's really hard to enforce your space. But I used to pretend like I had an invisible door, right? So, to keep people from like walking in on me all the time, like I would just put like papers down, right? So that physically they would like see that and like they'd have to think, should I step on these papers right now? Maybe that was a little passive aggressive, I don't know, but it was certainly something I had to do so that I didn't have to have 52 conversations each day. Hey, don't come in my workspace. Now, obviously there's also going to be people that are going to need your attention, right? Like, in your line of work, you may have a job where they constantly need you. Like, let's say you're IT, right? So you're going to have constant interruptions. Now, to play devil's advocate, to be fair, I also used to be the person that would interrupt other people a lot. So, and that was something that was pointed out to me. And then the fourth tip, obviously we went over, is the way that people use their communication, right? Or their emails, using things like per my last email, or does that make sense? Thanks. They may seem innocuous, but in fact, they are passively aggressive communicating with you. So these things can get us into trouble. Why? Not necessarily because they happen, but because of how we act on that. And I always used to feel that when I was feeling dysregulated, like I felt like people could feel that coming off of me. Even if I didn't say anything or I didn't make an expression. And I think looking back on it, that is true. People can tell if you're stressed or, you're clenched or you're not moving, especially in a small environment. Like I had a coworker say, Jennifer, people can feel those angry looks that you give out. So those things can lead us into trouble, HR trouble, low performance reviews, being fired, being put on probation. And, then that sends us into a worry wheel and a shame cycle. What's going to happen to my money? What's going to happen to my job? Oh God, I don't want to spend 3 months looking for a job and like getting attuned and getting my money and then falling behind. But these are things that happen to those of us with borderline personality disorder. They certainly happen to me more times than I care to admit. So how can you cope ahead? How can you prepare yourself in the best way possible to deal with all of these triggers? My number one thing, and I'm going to talk about using all of the DBT skills, the first thing I'll say is, out of the emotional regulation module of DBT, use your cope aheads. I'll put up a link. I did a video called the cope ahead list. And the cope ahead list is something that I have done and I kind of created. And I write out problematic behaviors or situations that'll be triggering to me. So like Jeanette always walks into my office. Sammy always calls me 52 times a day. Molly always does this, right? And then I will write out something that is a solution to that problem. So it may be something like, that Sammy will walk into your office a bunch of times. So, tell him once that you can see him once that day and maybe plan to have a 10-minute meeting with him in the morning, right? Or, it could be something else like you're only going to answer emails from 10 to 12. You're going to take a lunch break and then you'll answer phone calls, right? Coping ahead, just preparing yourself for these triggers that might come up. Another thing that gets us into trouble is the rushing and overloading the schedule and the talking too much during a conversation and the not breathing and then the not listening to other people. And, sometimes when I was rushing, I didn't read all of my work emails properly. And then I would respond and they'd be like, what? And then I'd go back to their initial email and I'd be like, oops, I didn't read that all the way. Right. And all because I just didn't take a moment to slow down. So now I feel like dumb because I've done this, right? Over apologizing. This is another thing that I recommend not doing. Look at your emails on a day-to-day basis and look at people who say, sorry to bother you, or sorry to ask, or they could apologize for something that wasn't even their fault. And it's like, apologizing like that is so discrediting to character, I don't have anything to apologize for. So, one common thing is like when, you get 100 emails a day, and so you can't email everyone back right away. So I used to say something to the effect of, let's say I let an email sit for 3 days and I couldn't get back to someone. So maybe your initial response might be to say, oh, I'm really sorry, in an email, right? Instead, something more controlling where you're not apologizing could be, hey, I meant to email you a few days ago, and then go into your reply. That way, at least they know that you've acknowledged that you've seen it and you don't have to apologize. So this is all in the emotional regulation module. Coping ahead, not overloading your schedule, which means not committing to more meetings than you could attend. That means setting realistic work goals for yourself. That means getting the proper sleep that you need the night before. That means leaving at 5:30 p.m. I can't tell you how many times I stay till 7 or 8. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. In fact, studies show that after a 40-hour work week, people's ability to actually be productive, steep declines. Okay, so you're just there as a body. You can't even think properly. Eat, exercise, take your lunch break. I used to go on a run, during my lunch hour. Make time for you. Make sure you're sticking to your schedule. The more emotionally prepared you are with your body, the better you can perform at work. 2, interpersonal effectiveness. So the second tip to make sure you can be successful at work is to make sure you are asking for what you need, asserting yourself, using your dear mans and your gives, making sure that you're validating others, and making sure that you are not validating the invalid. Remember, we don't validate everything. We don't need to validate everything. It's, there are some things that simply you won't validate. Like, if somebody says to you, like, you're such a fat bitch. Okay. I'll say nothing. Like, sometimes saying nothing is absolutely more powerful. Asserting yourself calmly, asking for what you need, right? If you need more time for your boss, then you say that you need more time for your boss. You don't overcommit. Believe me, your boss will be a lot more understanding if you actually ask for what you need than falling behind. Also, interpersonal effectiveness means not taking on responsibility that's not yours. So not doing somebody else's work that's not your work. It means that you aren't taking over a load of something that's not yours that someone else is going to get credit for. That's not going to make you feel good, and it's certainly not going to gain you any favor at work. Speaking up for yourself, big thing. And then obviously the third is distress tolerance tips. If you are getting too overwhelmed, you take a break, you put on your earphones, you go on a walk. I just did a video on how your cell phone can help your BPD recovery, right? Use your cell phone to enhance more calm and stability, and use it for things to look at your mastery list and your I love me note, and things to remind you of your happy spaces, so that when you're becoming flooded at work and you literally can't leave your seat or the meeting and you don't want to cry, you can use these other things just to look at, okay, all right, that's my happy place, right? And obviously mindfulness. So spending some time each day being mindful can help you get you and your body in the practice of staying focused on the thing at hand. And mindfulness doesn't have to be what you learned in DBT necessarily. All mindfulness is doing one thing in the moment with your full attention. So that could be just petting your dog and only petting your dog. That could be going on a jog and you're only jogging. Again, my go-to is watching a foreign language film, because all you can do is read those subtitles unless you speak the language. And that's all you can give your attention to, right? Make sure that you're asking for what you need as well, okay? That will help stave off some of this distolerance. And I just did a video called Am I Allowed, which explains how to assert yourself effectively. So these are my tips and my experiences working in the corporate world. Please share your tips, your experiences below, how work has affected you and played against or helped your BPD. Do you find one job type easier to manage than another? I can absolutely tell you that living now in my new job, while it can be stressful, so much easier for a lot of reasons. I don't have to look at people every day, so if I'm having an off day, people can't see that. I choose who I want to work with. I choose my hours. I get a lot of physical exercise. I'm outside and I'm also around animals. How could you not love that? My name's Jen. You've been watching BPD Woman. Please consider subscribing. Drop me a line below. And as always, until I speak with you next time, please be effective. Bye.